If you are interested in starting your own podcast, we use Buzzsprout because it is simple and easy to use. Buzzsprout can get your show listed on every major platform while giving you the resources for a great podcast website, audio players that can drop into other websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening to your podcast, and tools to promote your episodes. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners, and that is why over 100,000 podcasters are already subscribed to Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. Following the link in our episode descriptions lets Buzzsprout know that we sent you. So in return, you will receive a $20 Amazon gift card from Buzzsprout while signing up for a paid plan. Most importantly, every subscription through our link is always appreciated and helps support our show so we can continue delivering the quality content that you guys listen to. That being said, back to the show.
Hello, and welcome to Comic Book Junkies. I'm Andrew.
This is Joe.
And we're coming back at you as promised with our review and takes and stuff of the sort for Superpowered, the DC documentary available on Max streaming. It's like a 3-episode documentary, going over a lot of things throughout DC's history, kind of giving kind of modern takes on stuff. And, it's an interesting watch if you're a comic book fan. But before we start diving in, how you doing today, Joe?
Doing pretty good. Life's been pretty busy outside of the pod still. I got married, my brother got married, Burger's getting married soon, so a lot of that stuff. But I've also been hitting the shops with Burger and Juan, for those who are regular listeners on the pod, and I haven't picked up anything too big, but it's just kind of nice being able to hit up the shops more often lately. And I did actually pick up a Spider-Man 252, so first black costume and Amazing Spider-Man. I had one a long time ago and sold it, but I don't know. I've just been trying to get as much of everything back as I can, and so that's been kind of fun.
No, I'm with you on that because I feel like there's a lot of books that we've gotten, especially in like the past year, that we've already had before. We were pumped to get them then when everything was nice and cheap, but then we kind of leveled up as collectors. We're like, oh, we could flip that for bigger stuff. But now with how cyclical everything is, you're just like, oh, well, I kind of do need that because I just got a 252 myself this year, like just a few months ago. So we're both back on the 252 train. But yeah, no, we've definitely been keeping busy. I mean, if you're new here, check out the Instagram at CBJ Pod. Type in Comic Book Junkies, you'll see our logo. We tend to post a lot of our pickups there. For those of you who already know, you already know, and we appreciate it. But that's enough Marvel talking Spider-Man and black costumes and all that. We're talking DC today. And if you know us, we love both, but we tend to skew a little bit to the DC side. So this was right up our alley. And, it kind of starts off like way back. Like we're talking like beginning of the company type stuff, like before their DC even. So it's a nice, thorough documentary. I mean, if you're new to comics, it's definitely going to give you a lot of context between how things started if you're not already aware. But for a lot of people who are already comic fans, like I'm sure a lot of you already are, I mean, there wasn't too much groundbreaking new stuff, I believe, like as far as like information that hasn't been covered in any other documentaries or articles, I would say. But a couple quick things. I will say that I thought were cool. Obviously, they're going back and they're talking about like Batman, Superman, their origins and their creations. Maybe it's just me and my lack of watching YouTube and stuff like that. But it was kind of cool to hear Siegel and Schuster's voices, the creators of Superman, and hearing them talk about creating Superman and what he meant to them and what he was supposed to be. Just because like we're talking about like the late 30s when these guys are creating characters. I'm just like a history nerd, even if it's only, like 80 plus years ago now. It's like I've never heard those dudes talk about anything. You just kind of hear about them in a historical context. So I thought it was cool to actually kind of get a little bit of personality out of these creators because a lot of these guys got kind of left behind, which they definitely get into as well. These guys got screwed on their deals. That you only make the biggest characters in the world, and then you're just on a weekly contract kind of basis, and you don't own shit. It's really unfortunate.
No, it did put a face to the name. I've heard the name so many times being a Superman fan, but I guess I didn't really imagine what they would look like, what they would sound like, their personalities, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Episode 1 did a great job of recapping the origin of DC Comics and even going far back as Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, the guy that created the medium in 1934. So I thought that was pretty cool too. And I loved, to your point, how much they focused on Superman and Batman
Yeah.
in this first episode. So I thought that was cool. And even recapping the whole Bob Kane taking credit for Batman, even though Bill Finger did all the heavy lifting. But for those that don't know and don't care to watch, Bob Kane admitted to coming up with the name Batman and wanted the character to have some kind of like winged aesthetic. But when asked what the comic would be about, the vision stopped there. So that's why he hired Bill Finger. Bill Finger created the costume, Joker, Catwoman, fleshed the whole thing out for him. But I want to pause here because I wanted some input. Like, we're talking about how unfair these contracts are, and many of them were unfair, but I don't know that it's a big deal if that's like the terms that they agreed to. You know what I mean? Because you can say no. People hire ghostwriters all the time. So I guess it would have been kind of cool to get more clarity on that. Like, did Bill Finger like want the credit for Batman, or was he okay just getting a commission to?
Well, I'm sure it's like hindsight's 2020, you know. I mean, especially because that ended up becoming like steady employment for him, at least for a short period. But you know, like, could you imagine? I mean, the contracts for the time, like even in the documentary, I mean, the initial contracts I don't believe were amazing, but because of the popularity of the characters for the time and the standard of the comic industry, those creative teams actually got a pretty good deal relative to other creators for the time period. But I mean, like I was mentioning earlier, I mean, you only create one of the big characters in American history and you have no rights to any of it, and it was all built on you. And I mean, sure, you know, you got paid for it, but you know, when you stop actively writing, what do you have to show for it? You know, you can't, you could say you're the creator, but you can't do anything with it. And if you stop writing, you know, or you get sick or something, it's like they could just find someone else to write the character. So I mean, you know, looking back though, I mean, that's why there's been so many legal battles, and there's been enough standing for them to at least get proper credits and everything like that on things moving forward. But no, you know, in hindsight, they got to be like so pissed that they signed that deal. But I mean, you got to think like Siegel and Schuster were like teenagers when they made them. I'm sure like they had some business acumen because they were dorks, but like I don't think they were like savvy businessmen back then. They didn't know what it would turn into. So I mean, you know, I'm sure that the company obviously had an idea of how it could go, but I'm sure even they didn't understand that it would be this big. So, you know, it's just a matter of it running its course. I mean, of course, it's easy to feel, you know, like you got screwed when your character takes off the way it did.
But
You
had it
know,
not, like, would it have been like fair if you're like, hey, I'm gonna pay
that's the
you.
thing. Yeah.
This is all I want you to do.
Yeah.
But man just kicked ass at it.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, yeah, if it didn't take off the way it did, I mean, their deal would have probably been just fine. But I guess that's the risk you take. But, you know,
Yeah.
is it taking advantage of people who don't know better? Because I mean, obviously they were just young dudes just writing a comic book. But like I said, like it's not like today where you could be a Twitch streamer and go, ice cream so good, and get paid like 7 grand in like a couple weird shifts on TikTok or whatever the hell they're doing nowadays. But have you even seen that, by the way? I don't want to get off topic, but like the fact that that's getting paid, and like Siegel and Schuster like busting ass making Superman, and they're like chucking like peanuts at him and like a couple nickels. It sucks. But
All about the algorithm, folks. So you know how to support us.
the algorithm, we don't understand it, but we need to. But
But anyway, yeah. So the first episode, like, also covers Wonder Woman coming into play shortly after and recaps a lot of what happened in the Silver Age of comic books, the Comic Code Authority, and even the impact that like other mediums, such as like the Adam West Batman TV series, had on pop culture. What I found interesting about the last part of that is I didn't realize that it mostly negatively impacted the comic characters because people found the characters campy at the time.
yeah,
And that actually helped Marvel, their competitor, do their thing, which I didn't really put two and two together. But so I thought that was kind of cool that they were moving away from comics, doing that. And that actually kind of led for Marvel to kind of excel in the Silver Age. And I knew they were killing it in the Silver Age, but I just didn't really sync the two timelines together. And I also found it interesting that the comic code also kind of helped Marvel because DC was kind of lost for stories when that came into effect, and it kind of felt more so like an opportunity for Marvel. But a lot of the documentary felt honest with how they were able to talk about the impact and culture, as well as how the company was doing financially between the decades. I also loved a lot of the interviews, getting to hear from people like Jim Lee, Grant Morrison, Mark Waid, and
Marv Wolfman.
yeah, and to
He was
have
inspired by the TV. That's the whole reason he got into comics.
sure, yeah, and just to hear their experiences too was kind of worth watching the documentary, especially seeing Neil Adams because obviously he filmed a lot of his parts before he passed, and they obviously threw something up to put respect there. But yeah,
I also like that you know how it's always they talk about the post-war period always being like a lull for the comic book industry because I mean you obviously I mean if you're well versed in comics you look to the golden age and you see all the well now considered like fairly like you know racist like comic book covers and like the Nazi stuff and the war bonds and fighting the Japanese and it was very like you know nationalistic and whatnot. And you're just like, oh, well, you know, maybe it's just the post-war period. People are just, there's not a war anymore. They're like, we don't, it doesn't have the same juice. Or, you know, you can't tell the same like war stories that get people revved up. But really, it's just because of the like, you know, the advent of TV becoming more popularized. That really tanked the comic industry. And I mean, the only way that like it really kind of helped stay afloat was, like you said, through the Batman TV show bringing back a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people didn't like it, but at the same time, like the comic fans were like, what? This isn't exactly how it is. But it did get a lot of like mainstream eyes on it. And then other than that, I mean, like I said, it even inspired Marv Wolfman, who's like one of my up there comic creators, to get started on it. So like it's cool that like not a lot of those different inspirations between TV and like early comics could, you know, influence a new generation, which I'm wondering like what the next generation is going to be like influenced by, I guess, because our generation is probably already writing. So like all the animated series of like the late 90s, early 2000s is probably then, but like I don't know after that. But that aside, I do also like that, you know, since you brought up the Silver Age, obviously a big Carmine Infantino guy. Didn't realize he wasn't a superhero guy, like at all, but he was really good at it. So like that makes me respect him even more because it wasn't even his thing. He just rules. And I like how the Silver Age also kind of transitioned to being more science based. They had
yes,
to kind
but I
they had to,
wanted to hear more about Flash and Green Lantern the way we did Batman and Superman. I know they didn't make as big of an impact as those two characters, but I was kind of hoping for just a little more when they talked about the transition to that genre of sci-fi.
I'm with you. But also, I mean, this is just a side note. It's the last thing I really got on my notes for this episode or part of the documentary. Is Lichtenstein can lick my nuts, dude. He's a thief. He was stealing those like love and romance comics and turning them into like pop art by just literally just like tracing on like a larger scale the art from a comic panel. That sucks. That's a load of baloney. I don't like that guy.
Preach.
Like
You
how
know,
lazy is that, dude? Like comic creators are getting like I said, maybe peanuts, and this dude's like making bank just making larger pop art versions of it, like a 1-to-1 copy of what they made. It's like how lazy can you get?
yeah, I
Lick
don't
my
know.
nuts.
Lick them.
Yeah, dude, that was stuck in my craw. I wasn't ready for that.
Yeah, it just, I don't know. You got to do your due diligence to see what you're supporting and who you're supporting. And speaking of which, I was not a fan of Phil Jimenez.
Phil Jimenez.
Yes, bro. What a menace.
What got you perturbed?
I don't know. There were just so many cool creators, and I feel like they focused on him a lot. And, his story about the 9/11 stuff was really cool. But outside of that, I couldn't hang.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't exactly the one I wanted to hear from, especially relative to like the other caliber of interviewees that they had, like for everything else. They got like OGs up in there, and then
And then
here
that
comes
guy.
Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I don't know if you're gonna hear this, Phil. I mean, nothing personal, brother, but just maybe not one of the high points of the documentary. But
Yeah.
one other thing I wanted to say is how I was talking about the Batman TV show in the 60s, how Batman was almost canceled up until then. When Warner came in like after that and started making everything corporate, they wanted to make a Superman movie, and that ended up being like the game changer because things were kind of rocky for that period. And it turns out that early Superman movie kind of brought comics back into the good graces of corporate America and like people in general, which is classic. I like that they kind of got into a little bit of that.
Oh, I loved that part because they were talking about how they were like almost a second where they were about to half-ass it, and they're like, no, like this has to be like legit. And yeah, I mean, it's one of
Bring
my
in Donner.
favorite superhero movies to date. I
Yeah.
love the first Superman movie. It's long, but it's really good. And yeah, I thought that was one of the better portions of the documentary.
Word. Well, you want to head into the second episode and get into a little bit of the topic of that one?
Yes.
Now started off nice. You know me, longtime listeners. You know Captain Marvel, Shazam, my guy. If you're new here, just told you what it is. I like that they made note that he was the first on TV and like on screen, and I love that because he rules. He was outselling Superman, by the way. But I like that they even included his faucet history as part of the DC umbrella because up until the 70s, that's not who he was. He was just faucet and then out of publication. But, you know, I did also like, I thought the older stuff was way cooler, but then they brought in Zachary Levy or Levi, whatever the hell his name is. And he was talking about how his first Shazam movie was like so light and stuff like that. And I was just like, brother, did we watch the same movie? Because like, did he just forget that they filmed that boardroom scene with Dr. Sivana and the Seven Deadly Sins, like eating people and chucking them out the like building and stuff? Like, they got kind of gruesome for a lighthearted movie. If, like, you know, this guy's acting like it was all sprinkles and unicorns. And I don't know. It was just goofy. That stuck in my craw and I had to make a note. I was like, what is this guy talking about? Because he doesn't understand. I've really come full tune on that. That could be a whole episode one day. That guy acted more like a child as Shazam than the child did playing Billy. And that doesn't make sense. We'll leave it there. But past, you know, the Captain Marvel stuff, they started talking about the Bronze Age and how that began and how Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams made comics feel real, you know, with Green Lantern and Green Arrow, you know, kind of balancing the liberal and conservative mindset and approach between the Green Arrow and Green Lantern and, you know, their sensibilities and kind of just going on like a road trip more or less and just kind of bringing in real, you know, relatable aspects, which was something that DC was not doing, but Marvel was doing well and was starting to take advantage of. So they did it awesome by doing that. I mean, just awesome creative team in general. The art was impeccable, but that kind of became a turning point for DC, and I like that. And they even talked about how Kirby came through to do the New Gods and all of that, Swamp Thing coming out. You know, a lot of great things that we on this podcast especially love, but that a lot of DC fans in general have come to really enjoy. I thought it's a great time in DC Comics, in my opinion. It's just, if not for just those three things in general. But I will also say people were not pumped about groovy Diana Prince Wonder Woman when she had no powers and learned how to do karate. But they changed back once Linda Carter stepped on the scene, and they're like, you know what, we got to realign. And great idea.
For sure. And episode 2 is pretty good as well. I don't have a lot on it. Like I said, I would have liked to hear more about like the sci-fi stuff, but otherwise,
Yeah.
a lot of the rest of my notes are on episode 3.
Oh, no kidding. Well, I'll just keep on rolling then, brother, because there were things I liked in episode 2. I didn't keep much on episode 3, so. But I do love that they brought up the Super Friends because I haven't watched through all of it, but from what I have watched, hilarious. Top notch. I love that stuff. It's so dumb, and like Batman says the silliest lines to Robin, and they're just like Beavis and Butthead like goofing around like the whole time, and they call each other Chap and stuff, and they're always like being dumb. It's so good. I'm gonna watch more of that actually. But I do like that they made a point to point out that no one likes Aquaman, even back then. Like kids and stuff were like pissed off that they had like Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, Robin, and then Aquaman. They're like, what the hell?
Oh
And
man.
I mean, he was a dork. I think he's cool in like a dork way. I don't like whatever they're doing now with Aquaman. I'd rather him just be a lame dork than be a tattooed biker.
100%. Because
That,
that's
that
Lobo character.
it's just Lobo, but that talks to fish. That's lame. That's
Yeah,
not cool.
not cool,
Um,
guys.
Yeah, so we need to restore respect to the original Aquaman. But then they made mention that Black Lightning started popping on the scene in 1977, but then like not too long after that, the DC implosion happened and they canceled like 17 series or something like that. Comics were doing terrible. The DC implosion, obviously, they were trying to just, flood the market, but newsstands weren't doing well at all. Suburbs kind of ruined everything since markets didn't want to fill their space with spinner racks. So that makes a lot of sense for those of you wondering why you don't see comics anywhere in public anymore. It's because no one wants to return a bunch of comics and have to manage all that. But, in the 70s and started to really boom in the 80s, comic shops and the direct market really started to pop off, which if you're a comic fan today, that's how you enjoy comics unless you have mail order. So that's awesome. And then, Crisis happened, Perez Wonder Woman, Dark Knight Returns. It kind of went from like some classic stuff that like kind of got DC back on track into kind of almost that tone shift again with Watchmen and, Frank Miller coming around. Karen Berger, no relation, taking over, making Vertigo a thing, which Vertigo in its heyday had a lot of great runs that a lot of people still reference to this day. And then they started talking about trades, and I like single issues. I like online trades, but And then how about that one dude that just bought production rights to Batman and then made Batman 89? Like he just walked in there and bought production rights, just a guy. I get it was the 80s or like, whatever. And it's just, that could never happen again. I mean, like you just walk into a large corporation and be like, I want to make a Batman movie. And they're just like, sure. Like, what? I didn't know that's how that happened.
No, me neither. So that was kind of a cool behind the scenes thing too, but it almost doesn't seem real.
Right. And I don't know, that movie did rule though, so good for them for letting that happen. But he was real apprehensive about Michael Keaton. He did not like that Michael Keaton was going to be starring in his movie. Dumbass.
Right.
only one of the best Batmen ever. And
Yeah, when they were explaining it to him, like that it'll be okay, I thought they did a pretty good job of explaining like the
yeah.
duality of like his acting chops and
Oh,
stuff like that.
Beetlejuice.
But it's just like, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, dude was nervous.
But you just came in and bought the rights to something. Like if you're landing Michael Keaton in a movie, like you're doing well.
Yeah, and you got Tim Burton attached. Like, just trust Tim Burton. He knows more about movies than you, I'm sure. But whatever. I mean, if you're financing it or doing whatever, fair game. I mean, you can have an opinion too. But other than that cool stuff, the 90s came and then everything went to hell. Comic collectors like us, comic flippers and investors, I'd say we're kind of investors, but that ain't the point. But we're not flippers. But those dipshits ruined it for everyone almost. Because X-Men 1 got to 8 million copies and everyone was quitting to go to Image. And DC even got pushed down to like third on the pecking order back then. And then like the whole freaking market blew up because everyone was trying to flip books that no one was buying because everyone just overbought, overproduced books. Who could see that coming? But then outside of the market in general, they kind of capped this episode with a couple things with, Superman dying iconically. Spoilers. Yeah. And then, there was like 6 million sales for that, which we ain't scraping nowadays. I bet books are lucky to get like 50K for like a good book. But that was like a whole phenomenon on Fox News and everybody else was even reporting on that. And then, sex and violence are going through the roof and comics kind of feel like they lost their way, but like that's just reflection of society. But that's when a book that we read, and you can go back and listen to our take on it, Kingdom Come, came out with Mark Waid and Alex Ross. And I like seeing Alex Ross show up. I was just like, hell yeah, dude, because you know me, I'm a big Ross guy. There's no one who does it like him. I mean, his shit takes forever for a reason, and it's always balling because it's Silver Agey and it's like realistic. And regardless, we're not fluffing Alex Ross here. But either way, Kingdom Come came out, and that was just Mark Waid and Alex Ross's way of trying to say that like this is how comics should be or how they were and how they probably will be again. But then the episode pops off with it ends with actually the bubble popping on collecting and things kind of not going so hot. But yeah,
That Death of Superman stuff was kind of interesting. First, it was like a hypothetical about like, what if we kill Superman? And then actually thinking about like, I liked how the one guy phrased it. He said, the readers did it because like when you stop caring about the character, like these are the consequences. I mean, we did an episode about the impact of killing off main characters and how it it's kind of desensitized now and nobody cares. But at the time, it was a really big deal. But I guess going into the last episode of the three-parter, I felt like that kind of strayed away from the vision of the first two episodes. It was mostly like social issues. And
Agree.
don't get me wrong, like I love stuff like Milestone, but I don't know. And it's an important part of comic history as well as it's like a great medium for representation, but it didn't feel organic. At least not as natural as it did when they were kind of talking about like Wonder Woman following Batman and Superman in like the first episode. I also
Yeah.
found it odd that there wasn't a lot of mention of, some of the more modern stuff like Smallville and how like that kind of brought more shows to CW. Like I felt like they could have spent a little more time on that. In
No,
fact,
they were.
it was supposed to be a Batman TV show, but then you had the Christopher Nolan trilogy coming out, and with everything being kind of gloomy post 9/11, like it was like switched to a Superman and a more like wholesome
Yeah.
vibe. And in addition to that, like they focused on like Zack Snyder movie crap, and even though they had like so many issues with like Joss Whedon and Ezra Miller, which were not mentioned at all. And you would think that they would even mention like Gunn's Peacemaker or like his relaunch with the upcoming like Superman Legacy movie coming out. And they didn't mention any of that despite having him on as like a interviewer. And I'm sure
Yeah.
they got to keep a lot on lock or secret, but it just kind of felt like they were focusing on the wrong things when it came to like what's going on in the like more modern era of comic pop culture. But that was kind of my take on that third episode.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I really do like the milestone stuff. I like more of the historical aspect of it. Like, I feel like they touched on earlier more so than I guess the stuff they expounded on in this. Same with Wonder Woman. But they did also mention like the Bruce Timm animated series and the Nolan trilogy, as you mentioned, the Injustice video games, which were good. But like you said, like the DC TV on CW crap. They talked about the new 52 dog shit. I did like that they said that the Flashpoint wasn't originally intended to reboot everything, but then they made it. So I was like, oh, maybe Jeff Johns would have been off the hook for shepherding us into the worst portion of comic continuity in history. But they put that on my man's. But yeah, I mean, the issue, I mean, he was fine. He obliged. He did it. And I mean, the story itself, self-contained, is good, but the effects were, could have. I mean, I understand sales were lagging around that. They need to do something, but I'm not sure that that was still it. I mean, we're still doing crises every 5 years. Why don't we do another crisis then? Like, whatever, dude. But other than that, I mean, yeah, there wasn't too much on this episode for me to really pop off about. There wasn't anything that got me as hooked as the first two. I just like the more historical and like I guess sometimes more boring stuff rather than the people explaining themselves and their feelings thing. I just like to know what happened. But yeah, I mean, at the end, what would you rate this? Like, it's about a 3 hour long documentary if you watch it in totality. How'd you feel about it?
All in all, I enjoyed it as an overall product. It was cool listening to the cultural impact and DC's attempts to stay current. I think they did a nice job of that in the second episode when talking about bringing attention back to DC by taking a chance on the new Superman movie. No, that was in the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
But taking a chance on that Superman movie, which is a great movie, and I think it could have been much more linear because they bounced around so much between the decades that it kind of got a little muddled, but pretty
True.
cool retelling for those that are unfamiliar with the history of comics and especially DC comics. And although a lot of it wasn't new to me, some of it actually was, which is why
Mm-hmm.
I would still recommend at least watching the first two episodes of the documentary. And it was kind of a way for DC to pat themselves on the back in a little bit, but all in all, I'd probably rate it like a 6.5 out of 10.
Oh, now we're transitioning to the 10 scale. Oh, so that'd be like a 3.25 out of 5. I'd give it about that. Like a 3.25 out of 5. Yeah, it was fine. there were some things I learned. There were some tidbits that I thought were cool, but there's a lot of things that I don't care about. I mean, we are comic book junkies, but that doesn't mean we love everything. So I mean, there's a lot of the more recent DC stuff that I don't really jive with the way that I love all the old stuff. But that being said, like it's still a good learning opportunity if you're unfamiliar, and there's a few little nuggets in there that'll be cool to longtime fans who already do know a lot of that stuff. So it's worth a watch. Like Joe said, the first couple episodes are better than the last one in our opinion, but it's up to you. If you're bored, kick it on. You might learn something. But that being said, I mentioned it earlier. Check us out on Instagram at CBJ Pod. You can find us on YouTube, audio only for the time being, at Comic Book Junkies, CBJ Podcast. You can find us anywhere seeing our logo. We are on Facebook at CBJ Podcast or Comic Book Junkies. And yeah, rate, review, all that stuff, telling friends. I've said it a billion times and I'll say it a billion more. If you do it, we appreciate it. If you don't, we still appreciate you listening. You're doing your part. So that being said, next time, it's been a while. Think we're going to crack open a book, or in our case, stare at a screen. We're going to read something. What are we reading? We don't know. You'll find out when we do. Maybe. And if you don't find out, then you'll find it in your feed on Wednesdays, because that is when we drop. So, new episodes every other Wednesday. So you'll see it show up in the feed once you follow and subscribe to us. Anything else you want to say to our lovely listeners, Joe?
No, I'm excited to get back to reading something. Again, don't know exactly what we'll be doing, but thank you guys for listening through all the topics and hope you've been enjoying them.
Yeah, we appreciate you guys, and we'll keep pumping these out as long as you keep enjoying them. We'll catch you next time.
Later, guys.